Welcome to the Deep Dive Spirituality Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Brian Russell, and today I'm going to reflect on my top lessons that I've learned from my years in leadership, both as a pastor, also as an academic dean, and also learned how to lead while serving as a professor of biblical study and as a coach for both small business owners and for pastors and spiritual leaders. And so these are reflections. Again, as you've noticed, the last few episodes, I've been doing some thinking about my own life through my own 56 years. As you might guess, if you listen to my podcast, I'm in the process of thinking about what's next, looking at my age. Actually realized that I'm much closer to being 70 than I am being 40 anymore, much closer to being 80 than I am being 30. So I'm really trying to think about what it looks like for this next season of life before I begin to head into my fall and then winter years. Super grateful for my life. I'm grateful for these lessons I'm going to share. Some of these have come from positive decisions that I've made, and many of these came from those times when you actually just learn, and that's one of the things that I love about strategic coach Dan Sullivan, and one of the lessons I've took away from listening to him and reading his books is that simple line: learning or winning isn't always learning, but learning is always winning. And so this is one of those times where I want to do some winning because I'm going to reflect on learning. And that's going to be learning even from those times when it looked on the surface that I didn't win. If you find my reflections helpful, I would really be grateful if you would hit like, if you would share it with friends. And if you're not presently a subscriber or make this a favorite, wherever you're listening, I'd really be grateful to have you as a listener. And so let's start with, I think my number one priority as a leader, and I've always instinctively understood this, and that's lead from the front. That would be a military metaphor. I prefer Nassim Taleb's statement, skin in the game. In other words, to me, the key principle that needs to be embodied by all leaders, I suppose this is even incarnational leadership if we want to take it back and say, hey, Jesus modeled this, is that I want to lead always from a position of never losing touch, and even beyond not losing touch, but being connected with the frontline folks that I'm actually leading. So I never want to ask someone to do anything that I wouldn't do myself. And as I've thought about my life, I started out, I've always had jobs. I've always loved working. And so I started out being a soccer referee literally when I was like 13 years old, because I wanted to buy a moped back in those days, and my parents wouldn't, buy it for me. So I'm like, I had to earn my money. So I refereed soccer games. So I literally, it must have been hilarious. A little, middle school kid out there refereeing. Again, they were kids soccer games, but I have all these parents. Parents might not have been as nice back then as maybe they are now, but I got yelled at a lot by parents. I literally had to go out and learn, okay, if I'm going to play in this world, I have to get out there and get in the arena. And that also continued. I learned my next job, I was a paper boy, old school, and I delivered the afternoon newspapers. It was morning on the weekends. I had to learn about actually knocking on doors, collecting money, dealing with customer complaints, delivering papers, rain or shine, whether it was literally, and I'm not exaggerating this, whether it was like 30 to 40 degrees wind chill factor sometimes in the winter, or soaking wet in the summertime, hot, all in between. I learned the principle of getting in there and getting your hands dirty with stuff. And as a leader, whether I was an academic dean or even a faculty member trying to make contributions, I was never afraid to volunteer and get involved in places where I thought I could serve and make a contribution, regardless of how maybe glamorous that position actually is. So skin in the game, super important. Have something that could cost you something if it doesn't go right, over against trying to get in that leadership position where you'll be insulated. No. You want to be in there and you want to be risking just like the people that you have the privilege of serving. All right, second big leadership learning, and this has come over the years and I continue to work on this, it's self-awareness. Now, I'm not about to get on this podcast and claim that I'm self-aware, but I can say this. Over the years, I've discovered, whether it was mostly from other people helping me or myself, that I have a number of blind spots that if I don't keep in my awareness can hurt me in my ability to lead others. And so it's really critical. So ask yourself this, the first lesson was like, do you have skin in the game if you want to lead? Are you willing to get in and get your hands dirty? The second is like, do you have self-awareness? Are you aware of your blind spots? And what is a blind spot? A blind spot is simply something that's observable to other people, that's hidden for whatever reason from ourselves. And so like, let me give an example. When I was leading, co-leading with Eric Curry, a church plant that we did back in it's been almost 20 years now since we did that. When we were in meetings, we had a team, and we were able to attract a whole bunch of really capable persons, both volunteer, and we did have some limited salary that we were able to spread around to some folks. I realized that people had a hard time talking to me after I shared ideas, and then somebody finally had the guts to say, Brian, people aren't comfortable sharing in the meetings because you look like you're mad when somebody talks to you. And I'm like, really? They started asking some folks, and they said, yeah, you get this really serious look on your face and you kind of scrunch your eyes. And I'm like, I'm just thinking, I'm not mad. And that was a huge learning for me. So what I usually do is I tell people, don't assume that I'm upset if I make a face. And I try not to, actually. I've learned to try not to squint my eyes when I'm thinking, especially when I'm in a public meeting with people who don't know me. And a lot of times what I just say now when I lead a meeting and I'm with new people is, folks, when I'm thinking really hard, it may look like I'm annoyed or upset. I'm not, and you just have to trust me on this, and we need feedback. So that would be an example of a blind spot. I've also discovered over the years that I have a number of trigger points, and again, we don't want to kind of make fun and talk about being snowflakes who are triggered, but all of us have sort of hidden, you might call them landmines, that are sitting around us, that if somebody steps on one, it becomes really hard for us, whether it's to keep your cool or to think clearly or not simply to have some kind of emotional reaction to something that shuts you down. And I've learned what my sort of triggers are, and I try to prepare in advance for those things so that my unconscious blind spots don't derail a conversation. And we all know, and I'm not going to tell you what all my triggers are, but we all know people that if you say the wrong word, the conversation's going to go off the rails. Or if you say something, you can get somebody to say the same story they've said like 15 times. You've heard it all before. So just notice that you have those exact same things in your life. So learn to be aware of those things. So ask people that you love for honest feedback. The second thing for blind spots, when you do get criticisms from someone, don't just blow it off, right? Sometimes people are just being mean, but even sometimes mean feedback, once you can step back and reflect upon it, might have a kernel of truth. Like I worked with somebody one time, and we had all taken, we were trying to do team building, and the person looked at me, and it was in front of a whole bunch of my colleagues, and they go, Brian, you just come off like a soulless monster. It's literally, I could see everybody else's eyes popped out, and like, when this person said, hey, you're a soulless monster. And to me, I just kind of laughed, and I'm like, Yeah, I think I can see that sometimes. Again, because of my personality type, I can be overly rational, almost as a defense mechanism sometimes. And again, am I a soulless monster? Of course not. But on my worst days, can I act like I'm kind of emotionless and don't care? Absolutely. So whether that person was being mean or not, I've always laughed, and I've just kind of got a joke and like, yeah, probably on my bad days, I'm kind of more like Hannibal Lecter or House or the Darth Sidious from Star Wars than like this enlightened noble leader. And again, I say that with if you can't see the video, saying that with a smile on my face, because of course I do my very best to embody the gospel, but it's important to have self-awareness and know how you appear sometimes to other people, especially on your bad days, right? Because it's not easy sometimes to judge people off of their best days. Okay, third thing, and this is one of my favorites. And when working at the Orlando campus as a dean, this became kind of our trademark piece. We ended up calling it the Apollo 13 model. And what's Apollo 13? You all remember that movie, or it's a true story. The spaceship is up in the air. There's astronauts on it. Something goes wrong that had something to do with creating fresh air. And there's the famous callback to Mission Control in Houston. Houston, we have a problem. And literally the astronauts' life was at massive risk, that they were just going to die in outer space unless there could be a solution to this broken part for which there was no obvious replacement on board. They just couldn't go say, oh, I need a 60-watt light bulb, let me plug it in. There's no replacement part for this thing. And so what happened, and this is the genius, right? Mission Control got a replica, and they basically got every single thing that was on this spacecraft and laid it out in a room and brought in the smartest people they had and said, hey, this is the materials that you have. We have to reconstruct this filter or whatever this part was that was going to allow fresh oxygen to get to the astronauts. And so they took what was available and then thought, and this is literally kind of that cliche of outside the box thinking, it's take what you have. So in other words, be radically aware of what reality really is, not sugarcoated. This is what we have, period. I'll jokingly say we got a Coke can, a screwdriver, some duct tape, a deck of cards, and a few pieces of paper. Okay, we got to fix this thing just with this stuff, right? And this is what we call jerry-rigging also, right? And it's genius. There's a genius in being able to take what's there and coming up with a solution that allows you to move the mission forward. And that's one of my favorite lessons from leadership, because we all wish somebody would come over the hill and save us. We wish a donor would give us $1 million. We wish, again, we had different people on the team, but guess what? You have exactly what you have. So be brutally honest on what the realities actually are, and then get all the material. And sometimes you have to really be thinking and do some brainstorming, but get all the materials available and then ask, how can I come up with a solution to this problem with the materials that I have? And I'm just going to tell you, there's nothing more fun in leadership and being on a team than doing that. So don't wish, things were easier. As Jim Rohn said, wish we were better. Don't wish that you had resources that you don't have. Learn to be resourceful with what you do have. Fourth thing, I'm going to talk about team. Several of these in a row are going to be about teams, and I suggested that with the Apollo 13. Get a team together, but remember your team. There's no such thing as a heroic solo leader. We sort of lionize certain people for being great leaders as though they're the only one, but that's always a myth. The greatest leaders, no matter how smart they are, how talented they are, the ones that we remember have a team. Yet General Patton was perhaps the best general that the Americans had in World War II, but guess what? He had a division of men that implemented what he said, right? great political leaders, they may make decisions, but they have entire teams that implement those things. Again, I don't say anything else. I think of the greats, Jeff Bezos. Yeah, he may have thought up Amazon and worked really hard, but at some point he hired people and now has, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands, if not 1 million people that work for Amazon. So always remember your team and give your team the credit. Now that also means you shield the team from criticism from the people above us, right? If there's a screw up on the team, when you walk into a room and you have to give a report, this is assuming you're not the head honcho yourself. Most of us, like when I was a dean, I was on a council. I had to answer to a provost, the president, other persons on the. When there's a screw up on your team, the worst thing that you can do as a leader is throw that person under the bus publicly in front of other people. Because you know what? And I learned this from Jocko Willink's book. It's one of my favorite books on leadership. It's called Extreme Ownership. Own the mistake. Not only praise your team for what they do, but publicly own the mistake. It's on you, right? Because you ultimately hired people. You're in charge of making sure people do what they need to do. Yeah, if there's a problem on your team, you take care of that. That's a whole different podcast. I'm not going to get into management on here, but the key thing is publicly always own the mistakes yourself. You fix things behind closed doors, usually one-on-one, or if it's a team problem, you can work with the team together. But praise your team. It's always about the team. You'll never get any further than your ability to lead a team really well. And that's true for pastors. That's true for managers. That's true for mid-level managers. It's true for owners. We need a team, right? So have things built into your systems to praise the team, remember the team, shield the team from criticism. Always encourage your team to grow. That's a principle that I learned. When I was a dean, we always brought in, and I'm going to say this was at my initiative, I brought in folks that could teach all of us professors how to teach better. We were trying to do innovative things from the Orlando campus, including, we pioneered the hybrid teaching system at Asbury. We pioneered the use of videos. We actually pioneered the use of Zoom several years before COVID. So we were literally ready because we were always testing things. And so how do we learn those things? We actually focused in our meetings on learning. Not, there's always business to do, but we made sure that we resource things. The very day that we got the call from the seminary that we were going to have to put all of our classes online during COVID, I immediately put out an email and said, hey, and I sent this to our adjunct professors. I sent it to all of our professors and said, hey, we're going to meet on, I don't know, it was a Friday, I think, at noon. Or maybe it was the following Monday at noon. We're going to get on Zoom and let's brainstorm on how we could do the best job that we possibly can shifting to fully online. So focus radically on creating a growth environment for your team, because the more you can elevate your team, the more you're going to elevate your ability to actually bring the mission. The worst thing we can do as leaders is just run really boring meetings. Make the meetings about learning. So always encourage your team to grow. And here's another reality. If you can't offer people on your team the places where they can continue to grow, then I actually also believe this. Encourage your people. If you can't give them opportunities to grow, encourage them to go somewhere where they can grow. Again, I'm not saying try to get rid of and lose your best people, but here's the reality. If you can't give a great opportunity to your best person, you have to put yourself in that person's shoes. You would want the freedom to be able to move on if you want to a bigger challenge, lest you get stuck. And I can give an example of this. I've had the privilege of having I had two great administrative assistants while I was dean. My first administrative assistant was fantastic. I had no complaints, and if she would have stayed in the position the whole time, it would have been great. But I knew that she wanted to make more money. And we worked it. There was just no way I couldn't get her beyond just a cost of living raise. I couldn't get her the amount of money and resources that she really deserved for how hard she worked. And a new position opened up. In this case, it was within our institution, but it was to be a secretary for a vice president instead of just a dean. And I said, as soon as I saw it, I said, you have to apply for this. And me being willing to give her permission to leave made it easy for her because she was loyal to me. But that's the thing. I couldn't give her the opportunity to grow anymore in terms of finances. And so I had to just let her go, trusting that another great person would come to work with me. And guess what? I got another great person who continues to work for the institution to this day. So I'm super grateful. So create a growth environment for your folks. And don't be afraid that people actually outgrow your leadership or your organization for various reasons. And that's okay, right? If we can't continue to grow everything bigger, we're going to have to let people go on to follow their dreams, God's call on their lives. Another key lesson that I've learned is just about meetings, and I've alluded to this. I have a theory about meetings. I almost call it a kind of a law. It's almost like a law of physics, but I believe this 100%. A meeting will always fill to the time allotted for the meeting. So if you say the meeting is going to last for 3 hours, guess what? It's going to last for 3 hours. If you say the meeting's going to last for an hour, the meeting's going to last for an hour. So I firmly believe that a meeting shouldn't last 1 second longer than it needs to last. And so with really careful preparation, you can run a meeting, a very effective meeting, a meeting that gets learning, where you can actually grow together, a meeting that takes care of business, and the key decisions could be made. And also a meeting where you can actually do some visioning. All that can happen in a short amount of time. Now, do sometimes meetings need to run long? Yes, but rarely do they need to last as long as meetings typically last. So that's one of my leadership lessons. I'm not a big meeting fan, but I know as a leader, if I prepare, if I've done my work, a meeting can be taken, you can take action on the things that need to happen, and people can be connected well, and no one's ever going to complain that a meeting ran short. And beyond that, there's just an ROI on shorter meetings, because I always say, add up all the salaries of every person that's sitting in a meeting and recognize what it costs an hour to sit in a meeting where usually not much is actually done. You condense that, and then everybody leaves a little more happy because they're not exhausted from sitting in a meeting. You get more things done, and you get a higher ROI. So again, just remember this. A meeting will always expand to fill the time that you allot to it. Prove me wrong on that one, and I'd love to hear it. I'd love to hear your feedback. Apologize when you make a mistake. I'm going to say two things about mistakes. If you make a bad decision, apologize and then fix it. It's as simple as that. I made a bad call multiple times when I was serving as dean or even serving as a pastor. And if you hurt somebody in the process, apologize. And I really, I think you can apologize in private, but if you maybe embarrass somebody publicly, you should apologize to them publicly as well. It doesn't take anything away from you. Your team will actually respect you more. Reverse the decision and fix it. Simple as that. Now, there's also the issue of, again, I mentioned this earlier, but I'm going to connect with some mistakes again. When you've made an error, and then you're the one, and let's say in your got people above you. Let's say your team's made an error, you've made an error personally. Show up and own it publicly in front of whatever team you're on. This builds camaraderie. I remember one time I had made a really bad mistake. But I walked into our academic council and I had to own it. It was really embarrassing. And it was funny. I could see other people slinking down because I thought I was going to get hammered for admitting that I had screwed this thing up. Because I did. I made a bad mistake. But what I found from my owning, again, this gets back to that extreme ownership idea. When we own our mistakes, you don't get less credibility. Now, again, if you make mistakes continuously, this is everything I'm saying doesn't make sense. But let's just say that sometimes you make a mistake and it's just obvious. Own it. Don't pretend like it's not there. And that tells the people that you work for that they can trust you. Because you don't just take credit for the good things, you actually own mistakes. I think I got more credibility in the eyes of the person that I worked for by owning a really big mistake one time than for all the other wins that I did. That really solidified it. So own your mistakes. Obviously, you want to fix things. You want to have a plan forward, but don't shy away from the things that you mess up. Don't pretend like they didn't happen. That doesn't help anybody, because guess what? Everybody knows this happened. It's truth tellers that win in our world. Have the courage to tell the truth about reality so you can make good decisions. Also have courage to tell the truth about the places where, you didn't measure up to the standard. Okay. Red flags. You have to trust your gut on things. Some of the worst mistakes I made as dean was probably, and again, I'm going to be careful how I say this, but I think in general, I'm going to say this as in general. This wasn't just dean. I've made mistakes in this consistently. When you're hiring someone, or if you're involved in hiring someone, even if you don't have the final say, if you see a red flag, don't ignore it. If you see a red flag, don't ignore it. For example, if you're hiring somebody and you notice on their resume that they've literally had 5 jobs in the last 5 years, again, there might be a great explanation for that, but I would consider that to be a red flag, and that probably means they'll have 6 jobs in 6 years. Does that make sense? If your gut tells you that something bothers you about a person that you're thinking about hiring, act on that gut feeling, because you don't want to find out 2 years later that you were right about your gut feeling, right? Because every time we hire somebody, it's super critical. Again, you're never going to find the perfect person, but don't ignore red flags when you see them. And so what you should always have when you're bringing somebody on board is a list of red flags that you're looking for, that like the do not hire list. And if people start ticking some of those boxes, no matter how good they might be, no matter how fancy their language is, those red flags are going to be there after you hire them. So that was a leadership lesson that I've learned, and I've just seen it happen over the course of my lifetime. And then the last thing I would say about leadership, and again, of course, there's other things, is keep learning yourself. Never stop learning, as one of my best friends, Eric Curry, always says. Keep growing. If you're not learning something that's challenging you, you're going to burn out. You're not working properly. So listen to podcasts. People say leaders are readers. That could be listening, that can be reading, but keep learning. Read in whatever your field is. I'm a real advocate of reading widely, because you never know when an insight from another field is going to be helpful. Basic leadership books have been fantastic and helpful for me. Again, I'll just name a few folks that have really helped me. Listening to Jim Rohn, listening to Tony Robbins, going to some of his seminars. I always mention strategic coach Dan Sullivan. I've learned innumerable lessons from Dan Sullivan's books, books like The Gap and the Gain, books like Always Be the Buyer, his podcast that he does with Joe Polish, 10X, 10X Talks, Capability Amplifier that he does with Mike Koenigs. These are great resources. I've learned so much from reading John Maxwell's books. His books are very simple to read. They're almost like outlines that he fills in with stories, but lots of leadership wisdom there. I've read innumerable leadership books. I also recommend reading psychology books. If you know what your blind spots are, read in those areas to help you with blind spots. Patrick Lencioni, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. It's just a classic. The Disciplines of Execution. The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. So many good books that have served me and helped me over the years. Strategic Thinking, it's right over my corner. These books right here by Nassim Taleb. His books on uncertainty, Anti-Fragile, Black Swan, and Fooled by Randomness and Skin in the Game are just off-the-chart classics that have really shaped and helped my thinking. You can even learn from reading fiction books and learn the inner dialogue and see what helps the people tick. So just never stop learning. And you think, geez, I don't have time. One of my favorite places to listen to things is in the car. Old Zig Ziglar used to call it Automobile University. Tony Robbins calls it no extra time. If you're going to be in a car anyway, let other people listen to music. Again, you can listen to music sometimes, but let other folks listen to music. Turn your commute into the classroom. Listen to great podcasts, listen to audiobooks. Those little things get you ahead of the game and keep you fresh with great ideas. Keep a notebook so that you can write down your great ideas. I mean, even right here, I'm looking like I have the podcast planned here. I had an idea. I'm like, what are my key leadership lessons? Well, guess what? I wrote them down. This was written down about 2 months ago. Now I'm getting to it, right? So capture your good ideas, read, listen, always learn to ask questions. One of the reasons I do this podcast and do interviews is I want to talk to people so that I can learn, and then I can share that stuff with you on this call. So never stop learning. Again, if I could be of any service, one of the things I love to do is I love to support people who are leaders, especially spiritual leaders and pastors. But if you ever have questions, regardless of who you are, what you do, you can always reach me, Brian at brianrussellphd.com. If you're interested in coaching and having me mentor you in leadership, especially spiritual leadership, which is leadership with a core foundation of building self-awareness, deep connection with God, and advancing the mission that God's called you to do. That's my specialty. It'd be a real privilege to serve you. But regardless, blessings. Thanks for listening all the way to the end. Check out the show notes. You can really help the podcast by using the Amazon links that I have, even if you don't want the stuff that I link to. If you buy stuff on Amazon, please consider following a link and then searching for whatever you want after you follow the link, and I just get a little bit of credit from Amazon, and all that helps to support the work that I do here publicly. Again, until next time, live by faith, be known by love, and be a voice of hope to others.